Welcome to another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? I'm your host, Karen E. Osborne, and I hope I have a whole bunch of new audience people from Canada watching me. I love Canada. My guest today is Bruce Bishop, and he's joining us from Halifax. Is that right, Bruce?
Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yes, and thank you for inviting me, Karen.
Oh, I'm just delighted to have you. So he is the author of a series. You can see his beautiful covers in the back. So his newest one is Undeniable Relations, and it's the third book in this. Now listen to this. His family saga, mystery, historical fiction. I blend genres too. I love books that don't get caught up in where do you fit on the shelf in a bookstore. What do I want to write? So that just sounds so cool. And he's a former travel writer and has been all over the world. So we're going to ask him about that too. So, Bruce, I love that you were a travel writer. And I wondered, you've been everywhere. And I wonder how that affected two things. It's a two-part question. How did you move from travel writing to fiction writing? And then the second part of the question is, how did that experience of traveling the world, affect your writing or come into your writing?
Well, I guess you'd say, stumbled into travel writing back in the 80s. I took a solo trip to Barbados, first time in the Caribbean, back in, I think it was 88. And I wrote back in the days when you actually wrote letters home. So I wrote a long letter to my family and told them about what I was doing in Barbados and all the people I was meeting and the experiences. And I remember my sister at the time, who's 12 years older than myself, she said, "Gosh, this reads like a travel article from a newspaper. You should submit it to the Halifax newspaper." So I did and got paid and thought, oh, that's it, have a new career. But didn't quite work out that way. However, I stuck with it and I managed to get lots of bylines in national newspapers in Canada, started writing for guidebook companies like Michelin and Fodor's and
Mm.
Frommer's and all those. And by the time 2000 rolled around, I was president of the Travel Media Association of Canada. So
Mm.
it was a wild ride and a fun ride. By the time 2009 came along, I did have some family and I suppose financial responsibilities. So I drew back from it around the same time that with the economic crisis at the time, it worked out well to step back. But it wasn't until another decade that I actually had the nerve to sit down and try to write a novel, and that was at the beginning of COVID.
Mm. So many of us tried new things, right? As COVID began, we had to rethink our existence. And of course, I know for many, many people, it was a tragic, tragic
Hmm.
time for many families, period.
Yes.
It also was for lots of people an opportunity to try something, to do something different. Yeah,
Well, it really
interesting
was.
time
And
for create.
yes, and when something that unusual happens to all of our lives, it affects them in strange ways. And besides just the health implications, but I had three different writing contracts with magazines and newspapers that just dried up. That's it. Their advertising dried up. So we are not hiring freelance writers anymore. Thanks. Goodbye. See you later. And I mean, I am in Canada. We have a different governmental system than the States. So at the time, the government said we will help the freelancers out there who normally don't get any benefits anyway, like
Mhm.
unemployment insurance and that type of thing. And they were called CERB benefits, CERB, Canadian Emergency Response, something or other. And honest to God, that kept me going rent wise and everything else. And that's why I started writing the novel, but also trying to decide, do I try for an agent or do I self publish? So I went the self publishing route because I didn't know, and nobody knew where COVID would end, where we'd end up.
Yeah.
So,
Where was it
and I
going to
was,
take us?
yeah, and I was too darn impatient to wait around to see if I could get an agent to help me out.
Yeah. Well, you have beautiful, beautiful books. Every time I interview a guest, I want to buy their books, read their books. It's one of those. But since I do one a week and sometimes two a week, a lot of books, a lot of books. But I am looking forward. I think I'll start with your first in the series. But I want to hear like what, just on a quick perusal, it looked like they were each kind of different. They were kind of unique. So tell us about the trilogy.
Okay, well, I guess the adjectives in each title kind of gives it away a bit. Uncommon, unconventional, undeniable. I wanted to write about people that are overlooked in historical fiction, and that means
Mm.
people of color, LGBT people, and anybody who is feeling on the outside, and there's never any books or characters written about them in a positive light. Um, I think it was Toni Morrison who said, if you can't find the book you're looking for, then write it yourself. And that's what I decided to do. And it was scary because all of a sudden I had to, delve deep and into relationships and how I felt about the world growing up, and but at the same time looking for people that weren't written about in history and making
Mm.
them interesting characters that today's reader would find interesting and could relate to. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
where does
so
what period does the series take place in? It's over a period of years, right?
it is. The first book, Unconventional Daughters, begins in 1883 in Sweden and finishes in 1935. Uncommon Sons begins in 1935 and ends the following year. And then we jump 20 years to 1956 to 58 for the third book. Um, one wouldn't need to read one book before the other, or in any sequence, because each have individual stories. But what makes the three novels interlinked are characters, and maybe, for example, the young boy in, let's see now, book one is 30 odd years old later on, and we learn more about him,
Ah, so you see
later.
what happened to him.
Yeah, and I didn't think I'd be writing a trilogy after writing the first book. It was just you'd be asked, well, what happens to, so and so, and what did happen? And people get, as you found out with your most recent book, people get so involved with the characters and they become almost like real people to them. So, yeah.
Yes, I've never written a series, and people have asked me. So my answer when someone says, "Well, what do you think? What happened? What happens?" I said, "Well, what do you think happened?
That's right.
What,
Throw it
what,
back on them.
what do you hope for them?" I've had some excellent conversations as people told me what they thought would happen to my various characters.
Well, with the first book, with Unconventional Daughters, just a little anecdote that people are always a little bit shocked at. Um, it was inspired by a true story that happened in my hometown of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, in the 1920s. And we're talking of, if you can picture a little town in Maine of 8 to 10,000 people, that's what my hometown is, only it's in Canada. So, but back in the 1920s, a young woman married her stepfather, and it was an outrage in the town, a very Protestant, conservative, little seaside community. Um, but it really did happen, and I know that because when I was in high school, I was the editor of the school newspaper, and my mother gave me 4 letters that she had received from her neighbor. I wasn't yet born at the time, and the letters were the honeymoon letters that this young woman had written to her mother back in Nova Scotia while she was on her honeymoon in Europe. And I remember at the time when my mother gave me these flimsy letters with the beautiful calligraphy, she said, I know they're, they might be a little bit difficult to understand or to read, and they're not that remarkable, but this young woman married her stepfather. And then the three of them lived together in the same house after the honeymoon. And I thought, oh my God, boy, is that ever, a writer's delight to dig into that. So the questions that I have received, so many of them since then, people that know my hometown and they've heard about what happened back in the 20s. Now they're trying to figure out what house did they live in, are there descendants and this and that. So, but it's all
That's so
fiction.
cool.
It's all fiction. So
That is very, very cool. Now, I read that you also, did you want to say anything else to us about Undeniable Relations? Did you want to share anything? Like, what do you love about the main character, for example?
well, the main character isn't actually to me as interesting as a secondary character who is a 70 plus, again, this is 1956, right? So
Mhm.
a 70 plus African Nova Scotian woman who has been a housekeeper her whole life, and her background, her backstory, and everything that's happened to her really sets the stage for the whole plot. So she
Mm.
may not be the protagonist, but she's integral to the storytelling. And for that reason, Laurel Branigan, my character, is almost no, she is. She's very dear to my heart because if it wasn't for Laurel, then the story wouldn't have existed.
You
And
never
it
told
and
me.
honestly, Karen, where do these people come from in our heads, and how do they appear?
They just do. But sometimes I don't know if this happens to you, but sometimes I just see somebody and I think, I don't know how I'm gonna work this
Yeah.
person into my story, but that person looks so interesting. Or I
Hmm.
hear something and I always have a notebook with me. And somehow I know that at some point I'm gonna find a home for them,
Yeah.
in one of my stories. Yeah, like it comes to us from all kinds of places. So are you working on anything now?
Yes, I am. It's I guess for the category is not really historical fiction. At least I hope 1979 isn't historical fiction just yet. But anyway, it takes place in Toronto in 1979, and it's a coming of age story of the small town kid that goes to the big city of Toronto, and his life changes, and in more ways than one. So I'm on the first draft of that, about 50, 60,000 words into it. And it's harder to write this one than the past three, and I don't know
Mm,
why.
you don't know why.
I mean, I'm not one of those people that plots everything and has a big outline, and that might be part of the problem. I kind of let the story come to me and cross my
Oh,
fingers.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I'm in the middle of a murder mystery. And that's the only kind that you really can't, like all my other books, I let my other 2 books, because I have another murder mystery, I let the characters just take me where they wanted to take me. But
yeah.
with a murder, you know, I'm sort of letting that happen, but then I'm thinking, "Oh, heck, though, how does this connect back to the murder?" And
I know, I don't, and you've got to be so on your toes because you want to keep the reader guessing until the very end. And even when the writer, gets to the very end, you think, oh gosh, will people, will they not know?
well,
And
they figured it out.
yeah, and will they be surprised? I too had well, in book three, chapter one, page one starts off with a corpse. So there is a mystery as to how he died, but book two did have an actual murder mystery in it. And it was so gratifying after Uncommon Sons came out for people to say, oh God, I had no idea. And it's not
Yeah.
like yes, of course you put red herrings in throughout the writing and
And you
all
put
that,
breadcrumbs,
but
you know?
breadcrumb, yeah, but you don't, the murderer is never a person who's mentioned one time in chapter one. We wouldn't do that to the reader. So it is a character who the reader has met, but should be a big, big surprise. Yeah.
Yes, should be a plot twist, a surprise. I think it's very fun writing murder mysteries. This is my second one, and I'm excited about it. So,
Good stuff.
can you recommend? Uh, we have so many readers. Everybody that watches the show is a reader. So, what have you read lately that you'd like to recommend?
Well, okay, and you didn't pay me for this, all right? So I just finished True Grace yesterday, and I was enthralled with it because to me, you wrote it in the way that historical fiction should be written. It was entertaining. It brought to mind social issues that we still have today in North America. Um, but I was there. I mean, I was there in the streets of Harlem with the noise and the smoke and the congestion and the horses and the cars. And I mean, it's 1924. And so I just loved it, Karen. So
Oh,
that's
thank
my
you.
number one recommendation for
Thank you.
a recent read. And and then for the nonfiction, I'm reading, one second. This is called The Canadian Guide to Creative Writing and Publishing,
Ah,
and it's fairly new in the market. And the author, who's I believe a University of Toronto professor, she just realized there wasn't something like this on the market now for writers and authors. So it's excellent because it's very up to date. For example, all the literary agencies in Canada and who the agents are and what the
mm,
agents
mm.
represent, that type of thing. But also just a really good guide to fiction writing and how to get out of the quagmire or the block, or when
Cool.
things
Yes,
happen.
that's the other thing. We writers, we have bookshelves of how to, and we're always working on our craft, which I think as most creatives, you don't just think, oh, I've got this. We read to learn, we read other people's books to learn. Yeah, you're just always working on your craft.
Always. And I mean, it really makes you realize how much you don't know. That's the way I feel it. If my brother for Christmas gave me, I call it my Google box, or the woman who sits next to me here at the laptop, but it's Google. I don't even dare say it, otherwise she'll say,
They'll
what's
ask
up?
you what you want.
Yeah, but you know what? It's because we do have to use Google so much during the research phase of any book. It's amazing to get instantaneous answers to, questions about grammar or I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever you need to know quickly.
I'm finding AI being helpful. Chat GPT.
Hmm.
I ask Chat all kinds of things, and and gives me nuggets that I then can further research and further find out. Yeah, I thought I didn't like research, but once I started writing Grace, I realized that I did. So one quick last question, and then I want you to tell everybody how they can find you. You
Sure.
also teach writing, isn't that correct?
Well, no, I have a certificate in teaching English as a second language. And so I spent a couple of years before COVID teaching Korean business people business English, essentially online. But I am doing a workshop in January at my alma mater at St. Mary's University for just a class of 15. It's over a weekend, a very intensive weekend. And these are current writers of fiction and or published writers of fiction, and then people who are brand new and just want to learn. And I guess you could say I persuaded four author friends who will come in as guest speakers. And so one will talk about comedy writing, another one talks about thrillers and police procedurals. Another one will get into why location and setting is so important in fiction. So yeah, I mean, it's sold out. I was kind of shocked, but
How fun is that? It's awesome. That's so if people want to find you, you tell them how they can find that amazing website of yours, but also anything else, any other social media you'd like them to follow you, follow
oh,
him on.
sure. Easiest one to remember, I guess, is the website URL, which is brucebishopauthor.com. And yes, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I guess those are the two main social media ones. But you can pretty much find out anything on the website, and oh yeah, and to sign up for my very occasional newsletter. This is not somebody who writes every week and inundates people with stuff. So uh, love to have people on the newsletter list.
So you heard it here. Follow Bruce and also sign up for his newsletter and buy 1, 2, or 3 of his. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And what are you reading? What are you writing? Have a great week, everybody. And take care, Bruce.
Thank you, Karen, very much. Take care of yourself.